Hi, welcome to Here to There, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
Welcome to Group Talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Carolyn Taketa, your host and a small groups pastor at Calvary Community Church in Westlake Village, California. Well, as small group point people and pastors and directors, how often have you said to yourself, if only I had the money to do this or that? And we often feel stuck in our ministry because of a lack of financial resources. But if we're perfectly honest, sometimes I think we let ourselves use that as an excuse for not doing something that we know that we need to be doing. I don't know a single leader who says, hey, we have all the money we want to run our ministry. And the reality is that we're all operating under limited resources and limited budgets. So today on Group Talk, we're going to discuss this exciting issue of budgets and finances related to small groups ministry. And it is, I know I say exciting a little bit sarcastically, but really, this is the nuts and bolts. And without the resources, we can't do the ministry. So it's really important. It's a topic we've never addressed here. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Steve Gladen. Steve, thanks so much for being on the program.
I'm so excited that I got slotted to talk about budgets. So, woo-hoo.
It is. I know if anyone can make budgets exciting, Steve, it is you. So we're gonna talk today about the framework we need to understand before crunching the numbers, how to do more with less, how to prioritize the budget items, and maybe most importantly, what's the best way to ask for more money. So Steve Gladen, if you have not heard of him, maybe you're living under a rock in small group land. He's probably the best known person on the planet for small groups ministry. And he is known to everyone probably in Small Group Network because he's the founder of the network. And Steve, it's been like 10 years. I know I'm one of the founding members of your little tribe, but has it been that long?
10 years, yeah. We're celebrating our 10th year anniversary. So we're very, very excited about what God's going to do in the next decade. So got some exciting things that we're going to roll out to the leadership team at the lobby. And so it's very exciting.
I know, it's amazing. God's been so good to us. So Steve has been the small groups pastor at Saddleback Church since 1998, and he has such a long list of accomplishments, and we don't want to burn our time just talking about
blah,
exactly how fantastic you are, blah, blah. So, but most recently, he's written The Small Groups with Purpose and Leading Small Groups with Purpose, which has now been translated into 11 languages, which is astounding. Okay, latest language. This is becoming kind of a thing. Latest languages.
Albanian.
Wow. Okay, that is very cool.
Well, which is not the language, but it's in Albania, so it'll be in their native tongue.
And since they're translating, you do not speak Albanian. You have no idea what they're really saying in the book.
The pictures look the same, so that's exciting.
I love the quality control you have over these languages. All right, Steve. So I just want to say from off the bat, if you're listening and you're in a smaller church than Saddleback, which is pretty much 99% of the planet, you may strike you as being a little odd that we're talking about budgets with Steve, because Steve has obviously a bajillion dollars. That's what we think of.
Yeah.
And most of our listeners, especially including me, we manage a much tiny budget with many fewer zeros. But that was not always the case with Steve. And he has experience in smaller budgets with smaller churches with tighter budgets. He's also been all over consulting and talking to churches. So he really understands how to squeeze the most out of whatever resources you do have. So he actually is the right person to be having this conversation. And these principles apply, right, Steve, to really any context, regardless of church size and the dollar amount you might have.
Yeah, and actually there are things I wish I would have known when I was in a church of 200 when I first started out. And it would have been great to know today what I know back then. So it's one of those things where, it's very applicable, and it's something that we tend to shy away of it from pastors because we get a little spooked by numbers and we go, hey, we want to do ministry. But we've got to understand that if we don't know how to manage the church calendar, if we don't know how to help manage the church finances, we're not going to be able to have the impact that we need to have. And so this is super, super critical. And if you talk to anybody in my team, I am the least person who loves to talk about budget. I just hate dealing with it. And that's a common frame. But I understand the importance of it and the things we're going to talk about. And if you don't do this, you're actually doing more harm to your ministry than help because you're shying away from something that you should be jumping into.
That is so true. And I think the idea of stewardship with the money that we have been given, and that's a really sacred trust. And so I think you can't get away from budget. So let's talk big picture. What do we need to understand about budgets kind of in the bigger church picture before we actually start the number crunching?
Well, I mean, I think you just said it right there, is everything is actually before the number crunching. So before your church or your church treasurer or someone on your elder or deacon board even begins to bring this up, you've got to be thinking about the relational part of it long before the budgeting process happens. Because if you only talk about numbers when they're asking for the numbers, you're already behind the game. And so one of the first things that you would need to do is to start building the relationships. And I think everyone knows this in small group ministry. When you're working with your infrastructure, when you're working with leader training, when you're working with your small group leaders, everything, the economy is relationships. And it's no different when you're talking about budget and how you're dealing with that.
That's so true. You need to kind of build that credibility. And would do well with, if you've been given just a tiny bit, maybe when you first start out in that job and you've done well with that, then you're more likely to get a little more responsibility as well as finances. So it kind of does fold together. What are some things that in big picture we need to be sensitive to when we are talking about budgets with our senior leadership?
Yeah, and I think another one that kind of starts even before the number crunching is, making sure your vision of your small group ministry. At Saddleback, we talk about vision and mission. Our vision is what are we dreaming about? Our mission is what's our purpose. It's very important that those will line up with everything else in the church as a whole. So part of what they need to be able to see, big picture wise, is you're on the same team. Right. You're not out on the field running a different play. You're working with them. You're trying to stay inside, their size and scope, and you're the biggest champion of your senior leadership that's right there.
What about the issue with not necessarily senior leadership, but with other ministries? Sometimes it can feel like there's a pie, and the pie is only the size it is, and senior leadership has to divide that up, or you have to fight for a piece of the pie. Small groups ministry does. And how do you manage that part? I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where you had to kind of compete in some ways for that.
Many times. And I think it's almost, you got to do what's countercultural. What's cultural is say you have to fight for every little scrap that you can get off the table and work with that. But again, when you look through the New Testament and you see how Jesus worked, it's important to, when you're working relationally, what's important for your church leadership to understand is that you see the big picture. You see the church as a whole, which means sometimes you don't do what you think you should be doing because you want it for the greater whole of the church.
Right.
So I would say in other ministries, again, you want to build relationships with them and ask hard questions of saying, if this is where our church is going, this is what we're trying to produce as a disciple, then if you need some of my money that can help get you further down the court because we're working together, then I would say you want to gravitate towards that. But the more you can, and to take our small group language, the more you can be better together, the more you can start to work alongside each other and say, Carolyn, I know you're doing a different ministry, but you're my friend. And if we're all working towards this end goal with our church, then the conversations start happening as a macro church is how do you make this happen? And, we do it every time in our budgeting process. And I will tell you, it is the hardest thing to do. Nobody comes into our meeting saying, oh, I will give back, this much money, and I don't need this many staff. But one of the things I would say to you is limitations always force creativity. And when you're limited, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but when you're limited, your creativity rises because you've got to think a different way. Yes. And so when you're working with, other church ministries, it's going to be important that you're sensitive to them, but that you're also working alongside them where they're your friend. And part of that, again, needs to happen long before in this big picture. You need to have relationships, and your first conversation with another ministry cannot be in a budget meeting.
That would not be good. Yeah.
It's got to happen when you can say, what is your ministry doing? What are you trying to do?
Right.
And show me how you align to the church, because I'm always want to be a learner and find out, how we can gravitate that. And if your senior leadership is in the position they're in, they're going to sense, the attraction part of being whole church versus saying, we're going to come into battle. We always say that ministry is not a military campaign where you're coming into the budget meeting and having a war and you're going to take over certain things, or you're going to downplay or cut other people out from underneath themselves. But it's a political battle. You want to come along relationally. And I know politics has a bad connotation, at least in most parts of the globe. But you want to come around and understand that the heart of it is relational, to find out, what are you trying to do? And maybe we can work better together. And that's why when we have men's, women's, couples, singles, workplace and online on our team all working together, it's fun to watch them sacrificially give up something for another person, especially when you start to lay it out in the calendar year.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And there's going to be seasons, and I know we had one of these where we were really focused on a high school ministry. It needed a revamp, and there was just stuff that needed to be done. And I could see this coming down the pike, and I knew that whatever I was going to ask for, I wasn't going to get anything. Nobody was. We were going to focus on this one area. And our senior leadership said, I know this is going to be painful for the rest of you, but this is kind of the need right now. So we're going to pitch in. Everybody else's budget's going to be frozen, and we're going to move forward in this area. And so, of course, we gave the high school guy a bunch of grief about, being all sorts of things, because that's part of the love language of the culture.
As you should. You should hammer them.
Right. But at the same time, we understood, okay, this as a family, like a family. I mean, we talk about the Bible being a family system, right? I've heard you say that many times. And the idea that, the world does want us to think that there's a scarcity mentality. But in Jesus' economy, there isn't. It's abundant generosity. So for whatever season that may be. But at the same time, I was very clear in the meeting to say, okay, for this season, let's focus here. But then, that's going to put us behind in some areas that we can't advance as quickly because we don't have the funds for. So can we make sure that gets tabled for next time?
And Carolyn, you're bringing up a good point there when we're talking about the big picture, because it's not that you just cow down and say, okay, you can have all my money or you can have all my personnel, but it's very important for you as a leader to help them see what we always call unintended consequences, because nobody is thinking about the unintended consequences about doing something. But when you come alongside as a ministry leader and say, hey, I wholeheartedly support the high school ministry, but here's a couple of initiatives that may not happen, and here's some things we may not be able to do. And I'm fine with that, but I just want to make sure we all understand what's happening, because it's like in a family system when if you got kids that, got to get braces, or kids that are going to college, then all of a sudden other things don't happen for the other munchkins. And so,
vacations for the parents. Yeah, that doesn't happen.
Our spa treatments, they go away.
That's where the level you're at. All right. But that's a really excellent point, though. But I think it is important to lay out. I love that. Unintended consequence is a good way to talk about it. Not in a defensive way, not in a threatening way, but just to say, hey, we can't do X without Y. Here's some creative solutions we can use, but, overall, this is going to impact it. All right. So let's think more critically about this, kind of drill down some more. So what's one of the things you can do early on to kind of do you first see what's in your budget that you can get rid of, or how do you go about even tackling that?
Yeah, I think there's many, many different things, but one of them, again, it's counterintuitive, but you obviously want to get away, and you want to get alone with God before you talk about your year and your budget.
Sure.
As we look at two different cycles. We almost do quarterly budgeting. But twice a year is when I'm starting to pull away and say, okay, where are we going? Where's the tide turning? What do we need to do? So part of it is, seeking God and say, God, just take every ounce of selfishness away from me and help me to navigate that. But the other thing too is you want to be a good steward, and part of that is looking at, what have you done with what you got? Yes. And part of that is also there's other people. There's a principle that is very good in this budgeting process. It's actually good in church culture. It's called the principle of the borrowed sword. And, And you don't have to have every weapon to go into battle, but a lot of times other people have resources that you don't realize. And some of them are wisdom. And so one of the things I'd love to do is go into some of our guys who run major businesses. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, hey, kind of look at our finances. And especially if you get into some CFOs that are, in your church or maybe on your church board, and just asking them saying, hey, could you look at me, help me think harder, help me think more critical of my ministry. Where do you see I'm having waste? Where do you think I'm not doing it right? Because your eyes, and especially your team's eyes, are not always the most critical thinking eyes.
True.
That's why I always love it when new people come on staff, because their eyes are so much sharper than what we've gotten to. And so when you have somebody else look at your bills and look at how you spend money personally or corporately, right, or in your church, it does give you another part of, okay, this is how I need to think more critical by getting the wisdom from others that are there.
Oh, that's a good idea. I've also found that sometimes, even in smaller churches, there's things that people do that are duplicate, and they don't even realize they're duplicating it. So there's some economy of scale of combining resources with the other departments, or on a night, for example, we have childcare because of Awana programs on Wednesday nights. We always have childcare then. Well, a few years ago, we realized we don't have to pay for childcare on a different night. We can combine. It seems like no debt, but it took us a little while to figure out we can combine and use a night when we already have it available, and then it just costs us a little bit more for small groups ministry to have groups here rather than picking a whole different night. I mean, that's just a simple example, but even going from DVD to online, getting rid of the DVDs, like that saves us a bundle. There are just things over time that you get used to doing a certain way, and then if you look at it with fresh eyes, you realize, do we really need this? Is there another place in the church that we can combine and use resources together?
Well, and that's what you bring up some great points there, Carolyn, because on the point of, when you're talking about combination, when you're looking about, what things can we combine? Because many times in churches, and I can remember this in some of the churches I was in, I can remember there was a church when we were growing from that 250 to about 600. We had rapid growth, and we found out we were duplicating the same efforts. We were doing so many things that through economy of scale or just aligning. Mm-hmm. When you align things, there's even things of, when you're going into the very details of budgeting, like supplies, you can find out, there may be things you need. So, one of the things we as groups people do all the time is, we do banquets or we do rallies. We call them gatherings. But there are other ministries that do those things far better than us. And sometimes they've tucked away stuff that they haven't used, or children's or student ministries has themed some things, or if you have VBS at your church, there's sets and props and things like that are around there. And when you find out what everyone's been doing, and you almost see all the things that are out there, then there's things that you can borrow from each other. I mean, when we started at mysaddleback.com, one of the things, if legalities wouldn't have gotten in the way, I wanted to do a borrow bay. And that is, where small group people could say, hey, I've got a ladder, a 30-foot ladder. Don't go buy one, borrow mine, and building into that community and that. And if the church got the same way of saying, here's all the resources I have, you don't have to buy other video equipment because there may be another team that has it, or there's all things. So that's the part, when you're talking about combining and aligning. And then you bring up the death nail one is like, what can we terminate? What is something, we're hot on this too, of trying to figure out, okay, how do we terminate print material? How do we terminate DVD and move to streaming where everybody's at? And so it's a delicate process, but it is the critical thinking that forces us to do without, and then God brings that creativity around that can help us, go with those new areas.
All right. So if we do have a budget, whatever amount it is, what should be the top priorities for that budget? Say you only have a few $1,000s after salaries. So then what's the best way to spend it?
I'm going to go again a little counter-cultural right here, and think about, if I have so much budget, what percent could you tuck away so that you could help other small group ministries in your area? I remember when I was between jobs, and I had a church that flew me out to interview me, And I quickly realized on the interview that they weren't going to hire me. And I talked to the senior pastor at the time, and I go, I hope I don't get emotional on this, but he goes, I go, you know, it doesn't seem like this interview was very weird and stuff like that. He goes, oh, we're not going to hire you. And I go, well, why did you bring me out? And he goes, because you and your wife needed a break.
Aww.
And
that is so kind.
And it was one of those things where he goes, they carved out in their budget. And so one of the things I always do is I carve out in my budget to say, who are the guys and you may not be flying people out. I get that. This is not a church-wide budget. But there may be another small group pastor in your area that's going through a tough time. You're going to say, let me buy you a cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. Let me carve something away that's not for me, but it's for giving out purposes. So
I love that. We do that with feeding our huddle. When we have our huddle, we take turns, and we sometimes other churches support it. And if they host it, then we kick in some money for that. And it's not much, but it just helps a little. So I love the heart of that. All right. So after you do the the treasure principle, and you give back first to God's kingdom. All right. Then what? What's your top line item?
Now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of it. Okay. First off, leader development, leader care, leader resources. You have got to figure out, how do I get relational infusion into the people I have. Now, sometimes that's not even expensive. It's just calling your leaders up. It's eyeballing them on the patio of your church and saying, hey, can I come over here? And I know we don't have much time. We're between services, but you've been on my heart. I want to pray for you. But you want to get relational infusion so that they can have coffees, they can have lunches. You can go out and just start to minister. If you don't build a relationship with them, it's that whole thing we talk about. You want to speak truth into people. They won't take the truth unless they can trust you. And the only way they can trust you if you spend time with them. And we're wise about that. A lot of times, we tell our guys, we just don't have the budget for meals, but we'll help you have coffees with people and things like that. But I found more times than not, they end up paying for my coffee anyway. So but I would say, so you got to think leader care. What are those resources? What are the things that you want to infuse to help build the relational component of your small group ministry, which leads to the flip side of it. Is what can you do in leader training and resources to build the cognitive side? So you want to think head, heart. You want to think processes and people. You want to think through those things of saying, okay, how am I budgetarily starting to work alongside and thinking through how do I build the relational side, and then how do I build the cognitive side to my leaders? And that's going to be your leader training. That's going to be your community leader training, your coaches training, whatever you call your infrastructure. Those are going to be the cognitive things that are right in there.
Well, those two really go well together. I think probably the best budget item, and I would totally agree with you, number one has got to be leader care, is to provide good food for trainings. I used to just skimp and spend more on other things, and because I thought they needed books and different stuff. Then I realized, really, for them to come to the training, they need good food. So instead of just having a little dessert or a little this and that, I started having them catered. And it's a chunk of it's probably 50% of my budget is on food. But our attendance went from maybe getting half the leaders there to now we clear 80 to 90% every time. And they feel so valued. And it's really because, at the end of the day, they're coming from work, they're dealing with commuting, and to be able to come and just kind of take a big sigh of relief and have food there makes people want to come and makes couples want to come together. And it's kind of a night out. And we provide childcare, which also added quite a bit of dollars too. But I think that to them spoke value. And we consistently do that as probably a number one item.
Yeah. So those would be my 1 and 2. After the giving back. The third one I would say is you've got to get into video and technology. Yeah. Now, video can be for promotional purposes, although the more personal testimonies you can get from the platform, the more you don't need the funny videos or the eye-catching things, because stories will go much further than a commercial. Right. But the other thing, too, is I would say inside that video technology component, is start to think through video curriculum. And if you look at discipleship and what you're trying to produce as a disciple, your curriculum is one of the greatest tools that your small groups do on a fairly consistent basis to help shape that disciple. And the great thing is, it's another bonding piece with your teaching pastors, because you get them to do the video curriculum. And the great thing is, and I know publishers and houses are going to hate me for this, but in curriculum, most groups are a 2 or 3 question curriculum. They're going to give you a big booklet so you feel good about paying $6, $7 for that booklet. But in reality, you're going to do some type of opening question. We throw it to video. You're going to do a couple discussion questions and then some type of application question. And I know you can build all kinds of components in there, but when you're thinking on a budget, I would challenge you to start thinking through, and no matter what size church you're at. I was at a church of 250 that in the Panhandle of Florida that was doing great video curriculum for where they were at. And in today's technology, you may not be able to buy, the fancy cameras, but your phone may have the better camera than most churches have right now. And so thinking through, how do I align with my temple courts people who tend to be high content, and me being house to house going, how can I harness some of that content so that I can build video curriculum that gets their face in front of the small groups, but also starts to put into them, the video side of curriculum. So you can start to catalog your curriculums, on how they pair with, how you're trying to build health in your church. And that also plays into, then you can also, we do a helps for host, which is about a 3-minute little training nugget to watch that can help guide them through the curriculum.
That's a great idea.
Before each week. And so again, that all ties into video and technology, but using your money towards those things can start to make that happen.
Yeah, and along with that is, and you see this on our Facebook Small Group Network page quite a bit, people asking about databases and what works for groups and that sort of thing. And if you get the right technology, it really does make things much easier. And it's a big outlay initially, but I think it pays off and relationally, because you can keep track of people and deliver materials to them much more efficiently. All right. So in our remaining time,
let me jump in, because technology, I can know sometimes to be a black hole in how it aligns with the church. So just a little side note, when you're thinking about, I would put more of my money on the video curriculum and video and stuff like that, because in reality, until we had 1,500 small groups, we kept track of everybody on an Excel spreadsheet. Now, granted, that is not the best way. But if you're going, do I put it into technology where I can keep track of people?
Oh no, you do video first.
Or do I video? Jump into that.
Yes, for sure. You know what's nice about the other technology though is that if the church is already going down that road, then you just
up on that train.
Exactly. That's exactly what I waited till the church got really to a place where they were really wanting it for other data. And then I'm like, hey, we can also use that. And look, it cost me nothing. So that's always, it's good to make friends in other areas, as we talked about earlier. All right. And then for our final area, and this is a little sensitive, but what is the best way to ask for more ministry dollars? Say you've maximized, you've been creative, you've been a good steward, you've done all that you can with the dollars you've been given, but you really, to go to the next level, you really need more money. How do you ask for that?
Well, I like to learn the budget codes of other ministries, and I just align it towards them, and they never catch up.
So the Saddleback budget code would be...
There's departments, they're so busy, they don't even realize I'm spending their money. So, no, just kidding.
Nice.
Just kidding. Part of it, you have to know the love language of your church. It depends, if you're in a church that is very formal and, they're used to reports and things like that, then that's the way you're going to have to lean towards that. And you're going to have to say, okay, how can, it's almost like a logical proof, table of trying to be going through this, part of saying, okay, based on knowing my church's love language, and the people who deal with the money, how do I find out what they want? And part of that is also, you have the flip side of it. Our culture tends to be a little bit more loosey-goosey on things like that, and that can add different frustrations. But you're starting to go through with either one of them. You got to know, ask them, what is success? What are they hoping? What are they hoping to measure? Put it back in their court, because you may be thinking, oh, I've got to show them this, 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 and this. And they're like going, no, I want to see this and this. And so part of, utilizing your budget is making sure that you're aligning so that you're defining success the same way, and you can learn that. Another little thing, and then you can jump into it. They kind of go hand in hand. Reporting and stories have to go hand in hand. You've got to learn how to report what's actually working. And part of that is your job. You may get more budget money, but at some point in time, we're going to stand on the other side in front of Jesus, and he's going to have a little bit cleaner accounting system. So it's up to us to find out what is really working and what do we need to do. You got to be critical on yourself. We talked about that earlier, but you need to report the things that your church is looking for, and that can only happen from knowing that. But if you just report numbers, how many people got saved, how many people got baptized in groups, how many new groups we started, how many we retained, things like that. You want to have some heart behind that, because it's very easy for us to get into the larger a church gets, or the more formal a church is, it's very easy to get into the nuts and bolts, and you can forget very quickly why we do this.
Right.
And that's why it's so important to have the stories of changed lives. I can almost say with confidence, every church is going to want to measure changed lives. Whether that's stepping across the line of faith, or that's the sanctification process. So you've got to set metrics up in place, throughout the year, to capture stories and to capture all the metrics, depending on, what is that success benchmark for your church.
Yeah, that's so true. I also think, being able to look ahead. So say your church is growing at 3, 5, 10%, whatever, then you're likely to see hopefully some growth in a small group area, and that might require additional funding. It's more food, more resources, et cetera. And I try to look ahead and go, okay, if we're going to keep growing aligned with the church, then we're probably going to need a little more here or there. And I think really there's really no great way to ask for money. It's going to be awkward. And so I kind of start there and I go, okay, here's where we're at. Here's what I would like. And then in my head, I kind of know, okay, I know where the church is at. Pay attention to the bigger numbers. And so I try to make it reasonable at the same time.
Yeah, I think part of that too is, we've always got to keep the vision in front of the church, because churches they chase shiny objects all the time. In our culture, we go squirrel, and we're sidetracked. And so often we got to keep bringing them back to, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And so part of that in asking for more money is when they see due diligence, when they see that you're staying focused in the vision side of it, there's also an opportunity. And it may not be for the current year, but you always want to keep vision in front of people to be able to say, hey, this is what I'm dreaming about. And I know we're not there right now, but so your vision will help them. It's kind of like the Novocaine before you're going to extract one of their financial molars out of your church.
Wow, what a lovely analogy.
It's less painful, but give it time to work.
Before the root canal, yes.
Yes, but you want to be able to come to your church leadership and to say, keep the main thing in front of the church. We're great at starting things. We are terrible at stopping things.
That's true.
Because we want everybody to love us and we don't want to stop anything.
Well, the timing piece is so important. The Novocaine comes before for a reason. I almost feel like I try to give a heads up a few months before we're actually sitting down talking about budgets to say, hey, this may come up. We may need more, just to kind of put it out there. And sometimes we hear this from senior leadership world. They'll get hijacked by somebody on staff. And on their way, to the restroom or something, and someone will be like, hey, I need, XYZ. That's not a good time to talk to senior leadership. So I think paying attention to the timing, to the tone in the room, to when it's an appropriate ask, I think that makes a difference. We know this from parenting. When they ask us when we're tired, when we're likely to say yes, and then totally forget that we've said yes. So timing matters.
If they're not fed and if they're not well slept, then it's going to be an ugly conversation. So
maximize success by paying attention to the timing and the season of mystery. And here's one more thing. I remember when Eric Geiger wrote the transformational groups, and they did all that stuff. Lifeway did all these studies on, what are measurements of success in discipleship in groups. And this one little chart said people were more likely to give financially to the church if they were in a small group. They also said a bunch of other things. They were likely to evangelize, to pray, blah, blah, blah. Those were all spiritual measurements. Those were fantastic. But the one I really latched onto, and I told Eric this for job security and for budget purposes, was if you have people in groups and they're committed and building life together, they're more likely to give. Like study after study has shown this. And I said, now you've given us data for that. And you have served the small group point leaders well by giving us data. And so whenever I see any articles that kind of talk about commitment to the church and how people are in small groups are committed, more committed to the vision of the church, which includes serving, giving, ministry, all those things, all those measurements go up when you're in a group, that is actually a really helpful thing to keep in your back pocket to point out because that actually helps the church move forward in a bigger way.
Yeah, wholeheartedly too. I mean, and again, it's one of those things where churches are all on a different bell curve of adapting to both temple courts and house to house. There's no doubt over the last century, the church has been more focused on temple courts. That's what they've known. That's what they pour their money into. So you're going to have to understand that when you're changing your church culture, if they're a stats culture, then that book is going to be very helpful. If it's more of a relational, personal culture, then you start to help people from their church body share, this is what it's done for me. You bring testimonies up. And again, you always want to video all the testimonies because you never know when you're going to need them because your church culture will shift and ebb and flow with different things. So you want to keep an arsenal together of all kinds of things that your church culture may want, but understand the rate of change is going to be different for every church.
Oh, that's really true. Thank you so much, Steve. Is there any final thoughts? I know we've run out of time, but it's so worth it. Is there anything final you'd like to say to encourage us as we talk about money and budgets?
Well, I mean, just is all things with finances and stuff like that. You want to think developmentally. You think crawl, walk, run. And so, start thinking through, depending on where your church culture is, where your budget's at. I can remember when my budget was $1,500. And so you're like going, I could sneeze and spend that. But you just want to start small, be faithful with what you have. And God will see that, use a lot of the principles that we've talked about here to help you build a case. But a lot of times you're the conscience of the church for the house to house movement. And you have got to help them understand when God built the church, temple courts and house to house, he did it for a reason. And so it's going to be important for you. You can't abdicate that because your church is poor or you don't have anything, but you've got to jump in and help your church understand if they don't do this, they're going to be hurting themselves.
Wow, it's a great exhortation. This is true. So thank you so much, Steve. You can follow Steve on all kinds of social media, and Steve is super active on our Facebook page. Even when he's off in other parts of the world and country, he pops up on Facebook. So if you have any questions for him further on this topic or any other topic, feel free to post that on our Facebook network page. It's really helpful, and I love reading your comments. Sometimes they're quite humorous as well. As always. So,
I like to keep a smile.
Yeah, sometimes a little snarky, but there you are. So thank you so much, Steve. God bless you and your ministry. We so appreciate it.
All right. God bless you too. Thanks, Carolyn.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to Group Talk. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a positive rating on iTunes. I love reading those comments. They're so encouraging to us. And it also helps other small group ministry leaders find us. So we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Here to There, part of the Group Talk network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.